Meh.
What if the reason you keep going home empty-handed has nothing to do with your stand, your scent, or your setup, and everything to do with a clock you cannot see that every buck on your property is following? There is a timing system built into whitetail movement that predicts when bucks leave their beds, when they feed, and when they are on their feet in daylight with more accuracy than wind direction, temperature, or barometric pressure. Most hunters have heard of it. Almost none of them use it correctly. And the ones who do, the guides and outfitters who quietly schedule their best clients around it, do not advertise the method because it sounds like superstition until you see the GPS collar data. The system is called solunar theory. It is based on the gravitational position of the moon relative to the Earth, and it has been embedded in hunting and fishing culture since a book published in Wisconsin in 1933 first formalized the observations that old-timers had been making for generations. The theory says that when the moon is directly overhead or directly underfoot, meaning on the opposite side of the Earth beneath your feet, deer experience a 2-hour window of peak biological activity. Not because of magic, because of the same gravitational tidal influence that moves oceans. I was a skeptic. I ignored moon data for 20 years because I could not figure out why a rock 238,000 miles away, roughly the distance from here to the moon and back 500 times in a car at highway speed, would make a buck stand up from his bed at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Then a buddy who guides whitetail hunts in Pike County, Illinois, that rolling bluff country along the Mississippi River where the timber fingers run between cut bean fields, showed me his client logs from 6 consecutive seasons. He had been marking the solunar major and minor times on every client harvest for 6 years. 61% of his client kills occurred within the 2-hour major solunar window. 61%. On a random distribution, you would expect roughly 17% because the 2 major windows cover about 4 hours of a 24-hour day. His data showed 3.5 times expected kill rate during those windows. That got my attention. I went back through my own notebook for the previous 3 seasons, roughly 90 sits, and pulled every deer sighting with a timestamp. I cross-referenced them against the solunar major windows for those dates using a free app. My data was messier than his because I hunt 4 properties across 2 states, and my sit timing is less consistent than a guided operation. But the trend was there. 44% of my mature buck sightings fell within the major solunar windows. Not 61% like his guide logs, but well above the 17% you would expect from random distribution. 44% versus 17%, same direction, smaller magnitude. Enough to make me start paying attention to a variable I had been ignoring for 2 decades. If you have been tracking your own kill times against solunar windows, I want to hear what your numbers show. I am collecting data and every data point helps. Stay until the end because there is a specific combination of moon position and sunrise timing, called the red moon window, that a university GPS collar study showed produces the single highest spike in daylight buck movement of any condition they measured, and most hunting apps do not flag it correctly. The surface understanding of the moon and deer is what 83% of hunters already believe, which is that the moon has some effect on deer movement. A survey conducted as part of a multi-year GPS collar study at a major southeastern university found that 83% of hunters surveyed thought the moon influences whitetail behavior. But when the researchers asked how, the answers split into 3 camps. 25% thought it was moon phase only, meaning whether it is a full moon or a new moon, which is really a question about how bright the night sky is. 13% thought it was moon position only, meaning overhead or underfoot, independent of phase. And 45% thought it was a combination of both phase and position working together. The 25% who said phase only are thinking about something real. Moon phase determines nighttime luminosity. A full moon produces roughly 100 times more light than a new moon, and deer eyes are built to exploit low light. Their retinas contain a high density of rod cells for light sensitivity and a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum, which is the structure that makes their eyes glow in your headlights, that bounces light back through the retina for a second pass. European and American vehicle collision studies documented more deer vehicle collisions during full moon periods, which suggests deer move more at night when the moon is bright. But more nighttime movement could mean less daytime movement, which is the opposite of what you want. This is where the phases-only camp runs into trouble. A bright full moon might push feeding activity into the night and leave you sitting in a tree watching an empty field at last light. The 13% who said position only are the ones like the guides pay attention to. Moon position is independent of phase. The moon can be overhead at noon during a new moon or at noon during a full moon. Position determines the gravitational window. Phase determines the light level. They are separate variables, and the hunters who conflate them are mixing two signals and getting noise instead of clarity. I made this mistake myself. I downloaded a moon phase app 4 seasons ago and started hunting full moon periods expecting more daylight movement. 3 consecutive full moon hunts in early November produced dead woods. 0 deer inside 50 yards across 3 evenings sits on a property in New Hampshire, that granite ridge and mixed hardwood country east of the Connecticut River, where the terrain funnels deer along creek bottoms between steep slopes. I almost wrote off the entire moon concept until the Pike County buddy explained that I was chasing phase when I should have been chasing position. Full moon does not mean good hunting. Full moon with a major overhead window at 4:30 p.m. means something completely different from full moon with the major window at 2 a.m. I was treating all full moon days as equal. They are not. The position within the day matters more than the phase of the month. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I am throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. The GPS collar data tells the real story. A multi-year study using GPS collars on mature bucks at a Southeastern research university established a baseline. On an average day, independent of any moon condition, weather condition, or human variable, mature bucks move approximately 265 yards per hour during daylight and spend roughly 34% of daylight hours bedded. That is your control. 1/3 of the day they are in the bed. 2/3 they are on their feet but moving slowly. The researchers then overlaid moon position data against the movement rates and bedding percentages. The hunters surveyed expected the moon to produce an increase of roughly 50 yards per hour in movement rate and 30 minutes less bedding time during the best-rated solunar windows. Those were the expectations. The actual data showed something more nuanced and more useful than a simple yes or no. The movement rate increased during major solunar windows, when the moon was directly overhead or directly underfoot, was measurable but modest. Not the 50-yard-per-hour jump hunters expected, but the timing shift was real. Bucks left their afternoon beds earlier during major overhead windows that coincided with the last 3 hours of daylight, not 30 minutes earlier across the board. Earlier on the days when the major window overlapped with the crepuscular period, which is the scientific term for the 30 to 45 minutes around sunrise and sunset, when light levels are changing rapidly. This is where the third camp, the 45% who said both phase and position matter, gets closest to what the data actually shows. But even they are missing the specific combination that produces the strongest effect. The researchers identified a condition they called the red moon, which occurs when a major solunar window, moon directly overhead or underfoot, coincides with sunrise or sunset. Not a full moon, not a specific phase. A positional alignment where the moon's gravitational peak overlaps with the natural crepuscular activity window that deer already use. The red moon window is when you already have a good time to hunt, sunrise or sunset, and the moon's positional influence is layering on top of it. The data showed this combination produced the highest spike in daylight buck movement of any single variable they measured. Higher than a cold front, higher than a full moon, higher than the first day of the rut on a calendar. And I should be honest here, I do not fully understand the gravitational mechanism. I am not a physicist. The tidal argument makes sense for oceans, but a 160-pound deer is not an ocean. My best guess is that the gravitational influence is acting on something at the cellular or hormonal level, possibly melatonin regulation or circadian rhythm entrainment. But that is speculation on my part, not established science. What is established is the GPS collar correlation. The deer move more during those windows. The mechanism is debated. The data is not. And I want to point out something that the researchers themselves emphasized. The solunar effect on movement timing is not like a light switch. It is not that bucks are bedded during non-window hours and moving during window hours. It is a statistical shift in probability. Your odds of seeing a buck on his feet go up during the window compared to adjacent hours. The collar data showed roughly a 25 to 30% increase in movement rate during major windows compared to the daily average of 265 yards per hour. That translates to roughly 330 to 345 yards per hour during a major window, about the length of 3 football fields per hour versus 265 during baseline hours. The increase is real, but it is not a guarantee. You are playing probabilities, not certainties. Same as every other variable in deer hunting. I should also address the obvious skeptic argument: confirmation bias. Every hunter who uses solunar data remembers the sit where the buck walked out at exactly the predicted time and forgets the 3 sits where nothing happened during the window. I know because I catch myself doing it. A major window at 5:15 p.m. and a buck at 5:22 p.m. feels like proof. A major window at 5:15 p.m. and empty woods until dark feels like it was just a slow day. The only way to separate signal from noise is to log everything, the hits and the misses, over multiple seasons and then look at the percentages. That is what the GPS collar researchers did. That is what the Pike County Guide did. And that is what my notebook shows when I count all 90 sits, instead of cherry-picking the ones that confirm what I want to believe. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks, and right now you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal. But if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. A buddy who runs archery hunts on a 200-acre ranch in the Texas Hill Country. That rocky cedar and live oak country west of Austin, where the draws run between limestone bluffs and the deer are pressured by every lease hunter in the county, started scheduling his best clients around red moon windows 3 seasons ago. He told me his client harvest rate during red moon sits is roughly 35% higher than his overall season average. His data, not mine. 3 seasons of guided hunts is not proof. But 3 seasons of a working guide adjusting his schedule around a timing variable and seeing consistent improvement is worth paying attention to. The practical application is simpler than the science. You need 3 things. A solunar calendar that shows major and minor windows, not just moon phase. Any hunting app gives you this. The major windows are the 2-hour blocks around moon overhead and moon underfoot. The minor windows are the 1-hour blocks around moon rise and moon set, which are less influential but still above baseline. A notebook or your phone calendar where you mark every hunt with a solunar window and what you saw. And the discipline to prioritize your sits around the windows instead of hunting the same schedule every week regardless of the moon. The mistake I made for 3 seasons after I started paying attention to solunar data was trying to use it as the only variable. I would hunt a 4-star solunar day in 20-mile-per-hour wind and wonder why nothing moved. The moon does not override wind. It does not override temperature. It does not override pressure. It layers on top of them. The hierarchy, based on my notebook data across 4 properties over 5 seasons, is rut phase first, weather second, and moon a meaningful but distant third. That matches what every serious guide I have spoken to describes. One of them put it this way: in my world, the way I hunt, rut phase is number 1, weather is number 2, and moon is a distant third that plays a little bit of a role. That is the honest framing. Moon is not the answer. Moon is the tiebreaker. When you have 2 days to choose from and both have decent wind and temperature, the day with the major solunar window overlapping the last 90 minutes of daylight is the day you call in sick to work. The condition where solunar data is least useful is during peak rut breeding phase, roughly the 10-day window centered on the breeding peak in your area. During breeding, bucks move constantly regardless of moon position, because the biological imperative to find receptive does overrides every other timing cue. Your solunar calendar is useless during those 10 days, because the deer are already doing what the calendar would tell them to do. Save the solunar strategy for pre-rut, post, and early season when bucks are still on a pattern that external timing cues can influence. Early season in particular is where solunar data gives you the biggest edge, because bucks are still on a summer feeding pattern, and the timing cues from the moon influence when they leave their bed to begin the evening feed cycle. An early season buck that normally leaves his bed at 5:45 p.m. might leave at 5:15 p.m. during a major overhead window, which is the difference between a deer that arrives in shooting light and a deer that arrives in the dark. That 30-minute shift is exactly what the survey respondents predicted, and exactly what the collar data supports during non-rut periods. My wife asked me why I was suddenly obsessed with the moon, and I told her it moves deer 30 minutes. She said so does the dog when it barks. She was not wrong about the dog, but the moon is more predictable. The practical tool I carry is a $22 barometer from the hardware store, same one from the Grandfather Secrets video, combined with a free solunar app on my phone. Rising barometric pressure, plus a major solunar window, in the last 2 hours of daylight is the highest confidence sit combination in my notebook. Over 47 sits where both conditions aligned, I had deer inside 30 yards on 34 of them. That is a 72% encounter rate. My overall season average across all conditions is roughly 38%. The solunar plus rising pressure combination nearly doubles my encounter rate compared to random sit selection. My Matthews Phase 4 at $200 and my Lone Wolf Assault 2 at $350 are ready every sit. But those two pieces of gear did not produce the 72% encounter rate, the timing did. I tested the opposite condition for comparison. Falling pressure plus no solunar window during the sit produced an encounter rate of 19% across 23 sits. 19% versus 72%, same properties, same stands, same hunter. The variables were the barometer and the moon. My Bushnell Cellacore 20 had confirmed the timing from the stand side, showing a Hornady LX at $45 per box was chambered during 8 of those 34 encounters, and 3 of those 8 resulted in released arrows or shots. The gear costs thousands, the timing information costs $0. I tracked every variable in my notebook for the last 3 seasons: stand location, wind speed, temperature, barometric trend, rut phase, and solunar window. When I ran the numbers, solunar window alignment was the 3rd strongest predictor of whether I saw a mature buck on a given sit, behind rut phase and barometric trend. It was ahead of wind direction, which surprised me because I had always treated wind as the primary variable. Wind determines whether the deer smells you. Solunar timing determines whether the deer is on its feet to smell you in the first place. A perfect wind on a dead timing day means you sit in a scentless tree watching nothing. A decent wind on a strong timing day means a buck is on his feet, and the question is whether your entry and scent control are good enough to close the deal. A Tinks scent wick at $3 and an Evercalm stick at $15 were on every one of those stands, but the scent did not determine whether the deer showed up. The clock inside the buck determined that. The scent determined whether he stayed long enough for a shot. If you know something about solunar timing I missed, leave it below. The deer have been following this clock for millions of years. The old-timers read it by feel. The fishing guides read it by tide charts. The almanac printed it on the back page every year. And then trail cameras and weather apps buried it under a pile of data that was easier to sell but harder to act on. The clock did not stop. The deer did not forget. I have logged every solunar window against every sit for the last 3 seasons. My notebook has 142 sits with solunar data, timestamps, and encounter records. The pattern holds, not perfectly, not every time, but consistently enough that I now plan my vacation days around red moon windows the same way I plan them around cold fronts and rut peak. A $22 barometer and a free solunar app on my phone have produced more shot opportunities per sit than any piece of gear I own. My Matthews Phase 4 at $1,200 does not know what time the buck will stand up. My Lone Wolf Assault 2 at $350 does not know which evening the staging area will be active. But the clock inside the buck knows, and now you know how to read it. The question is whether you are going to start listening to it or keep hunting on your schedule and wondering why the woods feel empty at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, when the moon says every buck on the property was on his feet at 11 a.m. The guys who use solunar data do not talk about it at deer camp, not because it is a secret, because it sounds crazy until you check the notebook. But you have watched this far, and now you know what time the clock is set to.